Great. Thank you so much, Cameron, and thank you everyone for joining us today for the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center webinar, Expanding Dementia Capability in Indian Country, a case example from Intertribal Council of Arizona, Incorporated. The National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center webinar series is supported by the Administration for Community Living. Today's presenters are Mary Weston and Heather Mulder. Mary Weston serves as the Area Agency on Aging Region 8 Program Manager at the Intertribal Council of Arizona, Incorporated in Phoenix, Arizona. Ms. Weston is a master trainer for several evidence-based programs, including the Chronic Disease Self-Management Program, otherwise known as CDSMP, and Powerful Tools for Caregiving. In addition to her work at ITCA, which is the Intertribal Council of Arizona, Ms. Weston's experience in Arizona includes working as the Elderly Services Program Coordinator with the Gila River Indian Community and as the Caregiver Coordinator at the Salt River Pina Maricopa Indian Community. Prior to coming to Arizona, Ms. Weston lived with her family in Alaska for 12 years, where she worked for the state of Alaska providing social services to rural tribal communities. We also have with us today Heather Mulder, who is the Associate Director of Outreach Programs for Banner Alzheimer's Institute. Working with older adults, and specifically people impacted by Alzheimer's disease and dementia, has been the common thread in Ms. Mulder's career. At Banner Alzheimer's Institute, Ms. Mulder is privileged to lead the events and outreach team as they create education, support, and engagement programs for people living with dementia and their care partners. She is also the co-host of Dementia Untangled, a podcast that explores dementia through conversation to guide caregivers on a supportive path. Heather also co-facilitates the monthly Circle group and led the production of the Walk With Me CD for the long-standing Native American Outreach Program. She oversees the creation of education which speaks to caregivers and gives voice to those living with dementia in a language they understand and a medium that is comfortable. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Mary Weston to begin. Mary?
Good afternoon. We want to thank the Administration for Community Living and the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center for inviting ITCA AAA and Banner Alzheimer's Institute to share information about the development of the ACL Alzheimer's Disease Programs Initiative, ADPI Dementia Capability in Indian Country Grant in Arizona. We will begin with some information about the Intertribal Council of Arizona. The Intertribal Council of Arizona was established in 1952 to provide a united voice for tribal governments located in the state of Arizona to address common issues and concerns. The members of ITCA are the highest elected tribal officials, tribal chairpersons, presidents, and governors. These representatives have direct knowledge of the conditions and the needs of their communities. ITCA is governed by a board of directors with the work of the ITCA staff and consultants supervised by the ITCA Executive Director, Ms. Maria Dadgar. ITCA operates more than 30 projects, employs staff of 70, and is located in the beautiful historical building in downtown Phoenix. Next slide, please. ITCA serves 21 of the 22 tribes in Arizona. This map shows the 21 ITCA member tribes served in Arizona, both urban tribes and tribes that are in remote, rural, and isolated areas, facing challenges with cold, hard winters, lack of resources such as fresh water, adequate housing, transportation, or perhaps health care. ITCA AAA assists tribes with providing elder services in the areas of advocacy, education, technical assistance, program development, and coordination of tribal community-based services such as congregate meals, home-delivered meals, transportation, socialization and recreation, caregiver programs, disease prevention programs, ombudsman program, and state health insurance assistant programs. Next slide, please. Our key points to cover today are the introduction to the ADPI grant, the process that we use to develop the grant, the use of the powerful tools of caregivers program, outcomes of community-based dementia education. We're going to touch on building successful networks and share lessons learned. Next slide, please. We will begin with an overview of the ADPI grant. The Intertribal Council of Arizona Area Agency on Aging, ITCA AAA, received a 3-year grant award from the U.S. Administration for Community Living, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. for the grant period September 1st, 2021 through August 31st, 2024, with the goal of providing dementia education and awareness in tribal communities. Our ADPI grant team consists of myself, Jackie Edwards, and Flor Olivas from the ITCA AAA staff. Our wonderful partners are the Pascayaki Tribe, Tohono O'odham Nation, the Wallapai Tribe, Banner Alzheimer's Institute, and the International Association of Indigenous Aging, who serves as our third-party evaluator. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the roles of ITCA AAA and our partners. ITCA AAA and tribal staff provide evidence-based, powerful tools for caregivers training to include an understanding Alzheimer's dementia disease class delivered by Banner Alzheimer's Institute. The learning objectives of their class are: how does Alzheimer's disease differ from dementia? What are early signs of memory loss? And what can you do to support someone with memory loss? Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at the community-based education being provided by Banner in the tribal communities. Along with the powerful tools for caregivers program and training, Banner is providing the Understanding Alzheimer's Disease class as mentioned. They've provided 8 classes with 55 participants. The Dementia Friends Champions are trained to provide Dementia Friends information sessions for friends, family, colleagues, and others in the wide community. Banner currently has trained 72 Dementia Friends Champions in the 3 tribal partner communities, with 157 Dementia Friends trained. The Walk With Me music program is focused on helping individuals with dementia and their caregivers to reconnect with the world through the music they enjoy. Banner currently has presented this program to 123 participants, and Heather will be providing more information about this new exciting program. Balance for Brain Health training uses a mind, body, spirit, emotion model to provide tips on wellness, and Banner has currently provided training to 116 participants. The Native American Beacon newsletter, the Native American Beacon Spotlight, provide information and articles about Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and caregiving and brain health. And Banner's beautiful Native American activity placemats that you see to the right on the slide are used to create education and activity formats. Banner has distributed a total of 9,450 copies of the Beacon newsletter, Spotlight, and placements to the 3 tribal communities. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to take a look at the process for developing the grant. There are 3 phases to the process. The first process is the planning phase, during which we work to establish partnerships and receive letters of commitment, prepared the memorandums of agreement with the scopes of work and tribal resolutions. We developed a budget and scheduled planning sessions with partners to develop the work plan. We work closely with partners and the third-party evaluator, ITCA, to revise the evaluation plan to measure outcomes of our project activities. Next slide, please. The second phase of the process was the implementation phase. September 1st, 2022 through August 31st, 2023, which we've just finished up. And during the implementation phase, ITCA AAA held planning sessions with partners to develop marketing plans. ITCA AAA master trainers for PTC provided class leader training to tribal staff, with 3 leaders or more trained for each tribe. ITCA AAA and tribes facilitated PTC 6-week trainings with a goal of 24 participants. 8 sessions have been, 6-week sessions have been provided with 55 caregivers and family members trained. And ITCA AAA conducted fidelity checks with all of the tribal communities and trained staff to ensure that training was being provided within the standards for evidence-based programs. And Banner began community education, the Understanding Alzheimer's Disease class, Dementia Friends, Walk With Me, the music program, and Balance for Brain Health. Next slide, please. The last phase is the sustainability phase, which will begin September 1st, 2023 through August 31st, 2024. And during this phase, we will plan with ADPI partners for the sustainability of community dementia education and awareness. PTC tribal class leaders will continue their 6-week caregiver training, and AAA master trainers will recruit and train PTC tribal class leaders and master trainers. Banner Alzheimer's Institute will provide dementia education in tribal communities to include the Walk With Me program. And there will be collaboration of tribal and other community organizations to support continued dementia education, awareness, and resources. Next slide, please. So why did we choose Powerful Tools for Caregivers? It's an evidence-based educational program, which was one of the requirements for the grant. There's a strong focus on caregiver self-care. PTC is a train-the-trainer model. Tribes can train community members and staff and provide training in their own communities. It is a detailed, scripted curriculum, making it easy to deliver. Video and audio resources are available. The Caregiver Help Book serves as a wonderful resource for caregivers with many challenges. ITCA AAA has found PTC to be successful in tribal communities for over 10 years. And ADPI adaptation includes understanding the Alzheimer's dementia disease class trained by Banner Alzheimer's Institute staff. Next slide focuses on the class description for the evidence-based Powerful Tools for Caregivers program. The classes are led by a pair of certified class leaders with 2 primary focuses: caregivers of adults with chronic conditions, offered as a 6 2.5-hour or 90-minute workshops, or caregivers of children with special health and behavioral needs, 6 2-hour workshops. Classes are recommended to be kept at 8 minimal family caregivers up to 15 caregivers, no more than 15 caregivers. Classes can be delivered either in person or virtually. And understanding the Alzheimer's disease class description by Banner is conducted through 1-hour training for caregivers of adults with chronic conditions and those with dementia. Next slide, please. Class evaluations have shown improvements in the knowledge of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, stress reduction, self-care management, management of emotions for caregivers, a higher level of confidence, better use of community resources and knowledge of community resources, management of time, setting goals, and problem solving. Next slide, please. In building successful networks, it's important to develop programming unique to the tribal community and regional settings. It's important to involve the participants in the integration of culturally appropriate activities, such as music or art, dance, or storytelling. When building your own network, make sure you gather input from your stakeholders, such as family caregivers, care recipients and extended family, health services and community providers, tribal, regional, state, and national resources. Next slide, please. Before we end this portion of our information, we'd like to share some of the lessons learned. We did experience challenges during our journey with the grant, limited dementia education, awareness, and resources in the tribal communities, which was actually shared with us by the Arizona Indian Council on Aging, which serves as our advisory council for ITCA ADPI. And as a result of the information they shared with us, we went forward with submitting for the grant through ACL. Transitioning from COVID and COVID itself created many challenges. There was fear of taking part in activities after COVID, of getting involved again. There was low staffing. There were times that the tribal senior centers were actually closed. There was limited internet availability. And inclement weather also played a part in our challenges, such as harsh winters, flooding, and excessively hot winters. But there were successes. Support from tribal leadership is so important to have, the support of tribal leaders who can help and encourage the participation of those in the community. Community-based approach to education is so important, to be involved with all of the partners, organizations within the tribal community and outside of the community, and integrating education with community events, such as elder days or other health fairs and events in the community, involving yourself in providing information with tribal council, and evaluating further needs with the pre and post questionnaires. We learned a lot from the pre and post questionnaires and continue to do so, such as information that was increased about the knowledge, the level increase in coping skills and dementia knowledge for caregivers. We found out that small group settings were appreciated and that in-person trainings were favored over virtual trainings. This concludes our information on the ADPI grant development. And at this time, Heather will continue on with information about the exciting Banner Walk With Me music program.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary, for that overview of the incredible work that's been happening over the past couple of years. I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper with all of you into one of the new offerings that we're bringing out to communities through Banner Alzheimer's Institute and through this collaboration with ITCA, which is the expansion of our Walk With Me program. I'm going to give you a little bit of history on that project and how it kind of transitioned with the implementation of this grant. But before we do that, let's really just give you a taste of this. Music is intensely personal, and there are so many different ways that we can use it, not only for ourselves, but to connect with, communicate with, to move someone with dementia. So let's just get a little taste of this right now. And I want to play you a sample of one of the songs that's included on our CD. This song is called A Breath of Peace. Now, I don't know what your day has been like so far. Those of you on the East Coast, you're probably heading towards the end of your workday. Those of us more towards the West, we're hitting midday. we're getting to that afternoon time frame where maybe we need a little bit of a stretch. We need a little bit of time to just take a deep breath and pause and reflect a little bit. So let me get this queued up. Just take a deep breath with me. Go ahead and breathe in and out. In and out. One more time. Very gently drop your chin down to your chest. That stretch in the back of your neck. Bring your head back up. Look up to the ceiling. Come back to the center. Let's do a gentle head roll. Nice and slow. Back around the other way. One more deep breath. Oh, that was good. That song, I think, has the perfect name, A Breath of Peace. It's always hard to shut it off once I start that going. So I hope you get a moment to take that deep breath and feel a little more present with us this afternoon. I want to give you a little bit more background on kind of the impetus of this Walk With Me project, which actually started as a pandemic project. We have a long-standing Native American outreach program that has been in existence for nearly 20 years. And my colleague, Nicole Lomay, who leads these efforts, was always a road warrior. We would see her passing through the office, grabbing materials and heading back out to the next tribal community. And of course, when the pandemic hit, she was like the rest of us, kind of within these four walls. And we said, how can we continue to reach tribal caregivers? Because caregiving didn't stop because of the pandemic. And if anything, the load increased because you lost all of these outside supports that you had put and implemented in your routine. Knowing that there is often a lack of internet access, we also pooled some of the strengths that we found. I don't use this term lightly, but I often refer to this as kind of a stars aligned project, where we looked around at the strengths around us and pulled them all together. Now, I had been working on music programs for people with dementia and had been engaging sunshine music therapy in multiple of our projects. Through some of that work, we connected with a caregiver who also was a part of Canyon Records, which is a recording studio here in Phoenix, Arizona, that records exclusively Native American artists. And they have a long history, as you can see, for over 70 years. So we brought this idea to them, knowing music is such a powerful tool. How can we create something that's accessible, familiar, and taps into maybe some potential that has been neglected or forgotten about? Canyon generously opened their entire catalog to us, and they said, whatever you want to use, it's yours. And so that's how Walk With Me, the CD, kind of came into fruition. We also worked really closely with our tribal communities as well through an advisory committee, really just making sure that we were hitting the mark with this project. Now, there are 13 tracks on the CD, 12 goals of care that we encourage caregivers to experiment with music. You can see kind of a screenshot on here of one of the inserts. You know, the CD is amazing, but the real magic happens in that insert booklet, where every single song we talk about, here is a goal that you can have in using music for a person with dementia. We talk about, why does this happen? On here, why is distraction an issue for someone with memory loss? How can you use music to support this, to divert around this, whatever the goal is? And then finally, we include a representative song. On here, you can see we have a song from Kit Largo, an incredible vocalist, and we talk about, this is why we selected this piece. But just to give the caregiver an idea of, here's maybe some ways that you can think about this. Not that these songs are the it, because we know this is intensely personal. Canyon, often when we selected a song, would reach out to the recording artist and let them know that their music was being included in this project. So oftentimes there's comments included from the represented artist about the song or about what it means to be included in this project. Now, when we started working with ITCA, we took this CD and we tried to take it to the next level. It was designed to be a place in a caregiver's hand type of tool that they could read through and start to play with and experiment with. But sometimes it's easier if you're able to talk through it with people. It's easier if you're able to experiment a little bit and experience things. So we created, as part of this grant, this 90-minute companion presentation that acts as really a supplement to the CD, where we dive deeper into what are these goals of care. And let's try some of this out, just like we did with A Breath of Peace. Let's try doing some of these relaxation breathing techniques, just so you can really understand what we're going for here. In our 2 goals of implementation, year 1, you heard we met our goal, which was 100 participants. This year, we really had to do some creative implementation. Tribal communities were just starting to reopen. And so we did offer a really in-depth presentation at our annual conference, where around 200 caregivers and tribal communities come together. So we embedded it into the conference. And then we offered a lot of virtual presentations as well. Now, in year 2, which we've just moved into, our goal is to reach 150 participants, and I definitely expect we will have more in-person presentations this year. So for the rest of the time that I have with you, I really wanted to offer you more of a taste of what this Walk With Me music program entails. And we do like to talk about and give information about music and the brain. You've probably heard that music is a whole brain experience, and it doesn't just tickle your auditory cortex, if you will. You probably have had that time where you're driving in your car and a song comes on the radio and you're like immediately transported to a different time in your life. Music is deeply tied to emotional memory. And we know that while short-term memory is damaged for people with dementia, that emotional memory remains very strong. So knowing this, how do we play to this strength? You probably also have that song that comes on the radio and you just can't sit still to it. Your toe starts tapping, maybe you jump up and start dancing around. That's because music taps into your motor cortex. Those of you who love to exercise, maybe you have that certain playlist that you put on when you're going out for a run or you're on the treadmill or something like that. So music touches every area of thinking. So let's use this to our advantage when we're caring for someone who's living with dementia. Now, we have 90 minutes that we spend with folks in person, and that, I mean, I would have loved if we could have done like a full day. Can we just do 8 hours and talk about music? But 90 was a good kind of sweet spot that we decided to go with. And so we don't have time in that 90 minutes to go through all 12 goals of care. So instead, we kind of chunked them together into 4 different categories, including communication. Not only how can you use it to increase communication with your person, but let's talk about reminiscence. You know, we have still, like I said, those songs that take you to a different place. How can you find those songs with your person? And how can you start to elicit and draw out conversation when you find those songs that just magically reach into the memory banks? Attention is a huge one. And we're going to dive more into how we can use music with attention in just a moment. We also talk about movement. Of course, how can you use music for physical activity? How can we get the person exercising, moving around, which sometimes can become a challenge as people develop and progress in their dementia? So we give strategies about how do you find the right music for this? How can you encourage them to get up and moving? In this one, in typical Southwest fashion, we actually feature a chicken scratch song. Any of you who are familiar with that, you know this is really traditional sounding music. So really working on trying to resonate with our local Southwest Indigenous communities. And then finally, the 4th category is going to be self-care. So how can we use music to connect to that person? Connect to who they are as an individual. And then our final track, it was really important to us that we dedicated a track to the caregiver. How can they use music as a form of self-care? And we give them a little bit of information on ambiguous loss and really encouragement to use music in whatever they choose to do for self-care. So I wanted to go through a little quickly the information that we offer around attention and mood. And you can see on the bottom, we've noted here tracks 5 through 9 address attention and mood in some way. So this is a kind of a huge category that I think often is overlooked. Like we think of music and reminiscence. We immediately go there. We think of music and dancing and movement, but maybe attention and mood isn't something that comes top of mind when we think of ways that we can use music. So what we know in someone who has dementia, attention is often affected early in Alzheimer's disease, and it declines throughout the progression. They can have a lot of difficulty focusing on the task at hand, and they can be much more easily distracted. Did you just notice something beeped and I was distracted by it? That's ironic. So how can we use music for this? If we know that it's harder for them to focus, we talk about good caregiving strategies of if you really need their attention somewhere to stay on something, how can you eliminate potential distractions around it? I do a lot of work with individuals who are living with early stage dementia, and they help us really evaluate our programs and our materials to make sure that they really work for them. And one of the women that I work closely with kind of described these attention changes. She said, "I do a lot of mental wandering now," which I thought was a really powerful and interesting way to explain what her experience is like, almost this unwillful way to that her attention just kind of moves from place to place, and it's not really anything that's under her control. So knowing that attention and on the converse side, distraction can be big challenges, how could we use music for this? Well, let's really talk about where do you want the focus to be? So these are 2 kind of sides of the coin here. There can be instances where we really want someone to focus on something. I think a lot of times, we look towards late afternoon, early evening. Oftentimes, the person starts experiencing sundowning, where maybe there's some more agitation, some more confusion, and caregivers a lot of times are at a loss for what to do during that time of day. And so we say, make things calm, make things intentional, purposeful. And a lot of caregivers will reach towards those adult coloring books because they're a nice soothing activity that don't require a lot of intense brain power. And that can be a great soothing activity. Well, so we want them to focus. What's the tone that we want to set with the music? We wanted this to be soothing. So play something that kind of supports the activity that you're doing. Maybe if you're doing something in the kitchen, you're working together on getting the kitchen cleaned up. Let's look towards something that maybe is a little bit more upbeat that matches the mood of what you're trying to do. So use music to kind of reinforce and support that task that or activity that you're trying to get them to focus on. Now, if you want to use music for distraction, for the opposite thing, then we need this music to call the person's full attention. Sometimes we can see people with dementia kind of get stuck on something that's upsetting. They can start perseverating on something, and no matter what you do, it can be hard to pull them off that subject. So let's use the music to do that instead. That's when we go for what's the favorite song that they can't help but sing along to. What's that song that just gets them up and moving? That song that just calls their attention and they can't help but lose what they were kind of holding on to previously. And we also can use music for mood changes. And we know early on you can see changes in emotion regulation, a lot of apathy. Maybe the person is sort of losing that get up and go. People even early on are more prone to depression than other older adults. There can be both separation anxiety and anticipatory anxiety happening, just frustration around maybe the inability to do things as they had in the past. And as I mentioned with attention, fatigue and sundowning are all big challenges related to mood that this person is facing. Well, one music therapy technique that we do like to introduce in this CD and even reinforce in our presentation is a technique called the ISO principle. And this feels like having a little bit of empathy is like how I like to describe it. If someone is upset and agitated, a lot of times our first instinct is put on the soothing music, get them to calm down a little bit, play some beautiful flute music and encourage some deep breathing. And that'll work sometimes, but other times it's best to go in and match where that person is. Think about if you're upset and you're agitated, this isn't just a mood response. There's actually a physiological response that's happening too. You're breathing more quickly, your heart rate goes up. Well, knowing that, find some music that kind of matches that pace. And then the ISO principle, over the course of potentially 8 or 10 songs, take that more upbeat, potentially agitated sounding music and transition it now to something that's a little bit more soothing for them. Those of you familiar with different kind of experiences of dementia are probably familiar with emotional transference, where the person with the disease kind of starts to take on the emotion of the person that they're interacting with, or the music that is around them, or the TV show that's on. They can kind of start to absorb those emotions. So ISO principle is match that kind of where they are, that sense of agitation in the beginning, look towards, if there's an accelerated heart rate or something like that, and then transition it to something that's a little bit more soothing. Now, we weren't able to do an entire ISO transition for you on the CD, but we did do kind of two contrasting pieces to give an example of the different sounds or the different almost tones or moods that you could try to take on. So the first example, and I want to play little clips of these for you. The first one is a song called Strollers by a group called Pipestone. And you'll hear this has, you know, a strong, intense drum beat to it, and there's a pacing to it. That's our kind of more intense, you know, if the person is a little bit agitated, we have that strong kind of hammering beat with it that could potentially act as that empathy, if you will, for them. But then we contrast it now with this beautiful version of Amazing Grace sung in Sioux, and you can really hear the contrast in the two tones. So a definite major contrast in tone on those that, I mean, it's really dramatic. And those, again, are those sort of two extremes that you can go for and then try to kind of transition between one and the other. When it comes to outcomes of what we've seen sort of from this first year, we're still awaiting the quantitative results of evaluation, but, you know, anecdotally, I'm hearing back from caregivers how they're now using music on more of a regular basis. It's almost serving as a reminder of how important music was for them and for that person. Unfortunately, sometimes it's something that just kind of falls to the wayside. It can be forgotten how important it is that, oh yeah, they used to have the radio going all the time in their house and I don't hear that anymore. And so it's served on as an important reminder that that was important, and now they find they're kind of reconnecting with that. We've heard also about increased communication. One group that I was working with started playing the music before lunch. One of the ways we talk about using music is infusing it throughout the day for routine. And so they started using it to sort of make people aware that it was time for lunch. But what they also found, not only did it act as like the little, you know, alarm bell, a bell to call people to dinner, but they also noticed that there was a whole lot more conversation happening when the music was playing. As opposed to when it wasn't, it was pretty silent and people were just kind of focused on eating their meals. And then finally, increased socialization. One woman was sharing how now the neighbor comes to visit the mom that she's caring for pretty regularly, and they just put on the CD and listen to it together. And it offers an opportunity for them to kind of share those moments, reflect, share memories with each other. So it's kind of increasing the socialization and again, communication. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share this important and really special project with all of you. I think we do have a few minutes left for questions, but on here you can see our website if you're looking to learn more, and also my contact information if you have anything that you want to reach out to me individually about.
Thank you so much, Heather and Mary, for your wonderful presentations. It's nice to have a little bit of not talking and a little bit of music going on. Little variation to what we usually have. So we have some questions coming in. Feel free to put those questions in the Q&A feature of the webinar platform. Great question came in about language. So the question is, since the tribes all have varied languages and cultures, have you seen any negative effects of sharing any kind of music across various tribes? So if you're, for instance, the person says they are Navajo, would they want to hear a Sioux song? So Heather, do you want to talk about that from the music perspective? And Mary, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, when we have more time to dive into this, we really do take the time to explain how music is a universal language, but it's also intensely personal. So this is not meant to be the end-all be-all music selection. It's just meant to be, here is an illustration of the concepts that we're talking about. You know, that one song that's in Sioux, I believe, is the only song that we have on there that's in a different language other than English. And actually, when we selected songs, we were really careful. The majority of the songs on the CD are more of a modern slant, knowing that a lot of songs are supposed to be used only certain times of year or only during certain celebrations. And so we wanted to be really mindful of that. So again, we kind of prep people up front. Again, this is a tool and use this to your fullest advantage. Here's this song and this is why we selected it.
Great, thank you. Mary, anything else you want to add? Any feedback you've received about it?
I would just add that there were some tribes that actually expressed a desire as a result of hearing about and experiencing the Walk With Me music program of making CDs with their traditional music for their community members in their community.
Thank you so much. Can you both talk a little bit more about how you promoted these programs to have such good participation so far? Mary, we'll start with you this time.
Certainly. One of the most important ways to get the information out about the Powerful Tools for Caregivers program, and let me just start with the beginning, as I mentioned before, is first of all, sharing the information about your project or your new grant with community leaders, council members, and others in the community that work with the various community organizations, so that they have a good idea of what you are offering, how it can make a difference in the community. Our focus was, of course, on dementia education and awareness, which is needed in many communities. And then also involving those that are taking place in trainings or activities. Word of mouth is amazing in the communities. Word of mouth is probably number one, and that's community members going out and talking about what they enjoyed, what they didn't enjoy, and getting the word out there. And then we also encourage articles in newspapers, pictures of those that are participating in the trainings, and perhaps some testimonials involving the marketing.
Wonderful.
And I would just add, you know, the importance of really making an investment in these relationships, becoming a regular presence in these communities. You know, again, my colleague who leads these efforts is well known throughout the communities around Arizona because she's constantly reaching out and making connections. And that happened throughout the pandemic. So I think really important that you're really making these connections and maintaining these relationships for the long term. And I think another big strategy is tapping into things that are already happening. It's much harder to go in and say, come to my program, but you get much more response if you're coming into something that's already set up. Here's this regular senior breakfast. Come and be part of that because you already have this built-in network or population that's congregating. Sorry, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am, because there was noise outside. So you mentioned CDs as a modality for music. Is it safe to assume that the current generation of people living with dementia and their caregivers or care partners are more comfortable with a physical form of music, radio, CD, rather than digital or streaming? And then can you talk a little more about any barriers that could happen, like broken equipment, no electricity?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can make any assumptions, and there's such variation, really remote communities where there's no internet access. Certainly a CD is going to be the modality that they're going to want to use. I have had feedback, especially more in like urban presentations, inquiring about streaming services and things like that. So there's a lot of variation in access. So the CD, we felt, especially in the pandemic time, was the key tool that we should be using to reach families, especially in more remote or rural communities, knowing that their internet access was going to be quite limited.
Great, thank you. Mary, can you talk a little bit about Dementia Friends? Did you use a specific version of Dementia Friends, or was it adapted to be culturally specific to those you were providing it to?
It's actually Nicole that was mentioned by Heather Mulder. Nicole LeMay has been providing the Dementia Friends in the communities. And I believe that she is using the traditional model with perhaps some adaptations to the communities that she's already working in and is very aware of their needs.
That's correct. And I know that there is a tribal version that was created. The group who created is escaping me at the moment. But it's interesting, again, the nuances of the different, many different tribal communities across this country in this adapted version. Those of you who are familiar with the curriculum, there is a bookcase analogy in the standard presentation to talk about kind of changes in memory. And in the adapted Native American version, they made it a river. Which resonated with a lot of tribal communities, but boy, in the Southwest, it's all dry riverbeds. Rivers don't resonate with these communities. And so we actually continue to use the bookcase one because that's more relevant to the population that we're working with.
That's very true. No rivers. Sorry about that you don't have that water source. Mary, are there any other outcomes you can share with participants for the other activities that you're offering? Anecdotally, or other things that have come out of your evaluation so far?
I think one of the most important, the feedback that we received the most are caregivers, as I mentioned before, learning how to take care of themselves, finding that being with other caregivers is helping them to express their needs and their emotions. So many times caregivers don't want to express that they need help, or not maybe even taking a look at it themselves. And so that is happening for them, and it's giving them a new role with those loved ones that they're working with. It's also helping with the family members, other family members, learning how to have a family meeting and talk about their needs, and talking about what kind of assistance needs to be put in place and what resources are needed. and utilizing their resources more, not being afraid or feeling like it has to all be them that care for their loved ones, and reaching out for their resources is something we continue to hear about with all of the trainings and all of the dementia education awareness.
Great, thank you. I think we have time. This might bring us to the end with this question. Can you talk a little bit about the music transition? So Heather, you were saying that you might be playing a certain song because the person living with dementia is agitated, so you're trying to meet their mood. But then how do you move to a different behavior? Do you lower the volume? Do you put on a different song? Do you do something else? Can you talk a little bit about that in
Oh, yeah.
2 minutes or less?
Yes. Okay. Great question. And I apologize for being unclear on that. You know, really, ideally, that ISO principle should happen over the course of like 8 songs. And so you would start by playing the more upbeat, rhythmic song, and then transition to something that's a little maybe slower paced, not as strong of a beat to it. And over the course of those 8 songs, transition it to kind of a more soothing sound, like the example that I played of Amazing Grace. So it's really kind of the tone of the music that you're transitioning with. And, you know, it doesn't have to be this tribal music that I was using as an example. It can be, you know, if you're big, you know, Beatles fans, you know, come up with a playlist of Beatles songs that you can kind of transition through, that transition from something more upbeat to something that's a little bit slower, more soothing pace. But look towards pacing and going over the course of a bunch of songs.
Great, thank you so much. So it's a little bit of a stepwise approach, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you both again for your wonderful presentations. We've reached the end of our webinar, so I want to thank all of our participants as well for joining us today for the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center webinar series. Please keep an eye out for future webinars in your email. We will send out information through our listserv and post it in various places through aging organizations and those related to dementia. If you need to contact us, you can reach us at NADRC-webinars@rti.org. And just please note, we will send out the recording of this webinar, and we will send out the slides once they are 508 compliant or accessible for those with different types of disabilities. So please just hang on tight for those. We'll get them to you as soon as possible. So you're getting lots of thank yous in the chat, which is a great way to close out. And I think that's all that we have for today. Thank you.